Welcome to Cures and Capital, the podcast on value creation in biotech and pharma. I am Simon.
And I'm Martin. And we are here today yet with another episode, this time with Jan Lundberg, former president of Lilly Research Labs and head of R&D, being with Eli Lilly from 2010 to 2018. So what can our listeners look forward to in this episode, Simon?
So this episode will be another stab at unpacking the R&D productivity transformation at Eli Lilly, as told by one of the insiders who was actually there when it happened and also part of driving that transformation from within the organization. And this R&D productivity transformation is a very important part of Eli Lilly's history and a big reason to why it is so successful today. So we'll of course go into R&D productivity and discuss the levers within that, such as probability of success, cycle times, but also how the decision mechanics and culture around decision making at Eli Lilly has evolved over time. So this is going to be another packed episode. Please remember to subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, as it helps us attract new guests.
And as always, all views and opinions expressed in this podcast are our own and do not represent that of our employers. Now, please welcome Jan Lundberg. Welcome, Jan. Welcome to our podcast. For our listeners that maybe don't know you, could you introduce yourself?
Well, first, thank you for having me here. Let me give you a brief summary of who I am. I was born in a remote area of Western Sweden, and the main thing there was to play ice hockey as I grew up. So I became an elite ice hockey player that played, with the seniors already when I was a junior. And this also gave me the opportunity for a scholarship to the US and play hockey in Minnesota at Gustavus Adolphus College. But I decided, to have a more an academic career was in the end more interesting and also had a more long-term opportunities than a brief elite background. I joined a medical school, worked as a doctor for a short time in intensive care and anesthesiology. Then I decided to be a scientist on full time. Ended up as professor of pharmacology at the Karolinska Institute, and I was focusing on neurotransmission and mediators that interacted in a synergistic way. Part of that was discovering calcitonin gene-related peptide CGRP and sensory neurons, which then provided the basis actually for new migraine treatments. After a number of years, I decided to join the pharmaceutical industry. First, Swedish company Astra, and then I was global head of research for the merged company AstraZeneca. Worked there for 10 years after I was recruited to Eli Lilly in Indianapolis, Indiana, as president of Lilly Research Labs, which is research and development. I was very fortunate to be at Lilly, at the right place at the right time with the right people and skills. Lilly actually transformed itself from a medium-sized company to be number one in market cap based on the portfolio that I was part of delivering. And now, after my retirement at Lilly in 2018, I'm a board member and an advisor to venture capital companies. I am still enjoying to look into scientific questions and how medicines can be developed for the benefit of patients. And I've been part of at least 30 medicines that have been approved by regulators over the years.
I mean, even from your description and what people will probably be able to find online, I think your background is very extensive and your experience. But maybe let's unpack a little bit of it, especially your journey in Eli Lilly. So for some of our listeners, they know we had an episode with Aaron Schad about the paper Eli Lilly released in 2010 about what they called pharmaceutical R&D challenge and R&D productivity. You have joined Eli Lilly in the same year. So for people that maybe don't know what Eli Lilly looked like back then, can you maybe tell us or zoom into what Eli Lilly looked like back in 2010?
Sure. Eli Lilly was a traditional pharma company based in the US Midwest, and it was actually most known for being a pioneer in insulins, based actually on Banting and Best discoveries in the 1920s. but also a pioneer in antidepressants like Prozac. So with my background in neuropharmacology, I felt that to change from AstraZeneca to Lilly would be a good move. And Lilly had products like Zyprexa and Cymbalta in the neuroscience space, with several agents also emerging for Alzheimer's disease. So that was, the main reason for me to be excited about this opportunity, realizing that Lilly also had a presence in other disease areas like oncology, cardiovascular, and an emerging immunology franchise.
So it sounded like a great place, but I think for those that remember, I think your start in Eli Lilly wasn't so sweet. Can you maybe tell us something about that?
Yes. When you come to a new company as head of R&D, you kind of inherit your predecessors' efforts and, of course, all the people in a large organization that has worked for years to come up with various agents. And you also inherit phase 3 trials that have been started and are ongoing. The dilemma was that there were data emerging from some of these phase 3 trials, and they were negative, which of course was a big surprise and huge disappointment. So to me, it seemed like the analysis that had been done by the Lilly authors in that famous paper actually mirrored the pipeline they had created themselves, which was of course unfortunate. But the main thing was, though, which, I learned in ice hockey, that even if you have setbacks as a team, you have to rely on what you believe in. And science and developing medicines can be similar to the teamwork you need to have to win in ice hockey, because you need to have skills. And the Lilly environment, had a lot of people with tremendous experience and skills. But you also need persistence and learn from failures so that you can move on and win the next game. And finally, you are also dependent on luck to some extent, which may seem strange. But in hockey, if you hit the post, the puck may go in if you're lucky, but it may go out if you're not lucky. And sometimes with pharmaceutical development, if you have uncharted territory with novel mechanisms, you don't really know if you hit the goal post, in what directions you will end up. And the unfortunate thing was for Lilly, after a short time I've been there, both of the Alzheimer programs delivered negative results. And that was, of course, a disaster for Lilly, being then a neuroscience big area. And also, of course, for the patients, it's even worse. Yeah, and I can tell a story from that time, that after the data from solanezumab was revealed, I was called into the CEO of Lilly, John Lechleiter, which also recruited me, and he challenged me and said, we have now failed too many times in the neuroscience space, particularly Alzheimer's. Do we really know what we are doing in this space? And I said, yes, Lilly is probably the company that has the best knowledge in this area. And we need to learn from these trials and continue our efforts, because the patients are still out there and there's a huge unmet medical need. And Lilly has a moral obligation to use its skills to come up with the new medicines and use then profits from other areas like diabetes and cardiovascular and oncology to fund these trials. And he said, do you really mean that? Because it cost the company so much, these phase 3 trials. And he pointed out through the window where the Lucas Oil Stadium for professional football team Colts was, and he said, we have lost the same amount of money as it costed to build 2 of these local oil stadiums. So you have to realize it's a huge bet when you start phase 3 trials. And I said, yes, but we just need to know what we are doing in a better way the next time we do it. And it also led to the acquisition then of diagnostic company for Alzheimer's called Avid Radiopharmaceuticals, which did PET imaging for amyloid. So we could actually determine before anti-amyloid agents were given that this patient had amyloid plaques in their brains.
And I wonder, how did you manage to convince him to stay in the area? Was it simply that we need to learn more and that's what it takes?
John Lechleiter was both CEO and chairman of the Lilly board. And he had a genuine development background, and he was a PhD graduate from Harvard. So he had a great understanding of the capabilities Lilly had in that area. So I am a strong believer that he was an architect, of the Lilly success that we see today.
That is nicely put. And I think we will go into how you, together with the members at Eli Lilly, fix some of these issues. I just wonder, so from what you described, you came in, there was a couple of late stage failures. I wonder, how long did it take you to figure out what was happening? Some 1 or 2 late stage failures, they can simply be attributed to bad luck. So at what point did you realize that there is something perhaps more structural going on with these late stage failures that is not just bad luck and probabilities of success?
Well, the key problem that I saw was obvious, with the high phase 3 failure rate. And also, unfortunately, if we looked at the development times from starting first human dose to regulatory approval was very long if you compared to industry benchmarks. So it also meant that if you succeeded with a phase 3, you often were behind competition for the same indication and mechanism, but also that you eroded effective patent time in the sales arena. So those were 2 aspects that also were mentioned in this famous Lilly paper that you had earlier comment on. So we joined forces within the Lilly research labs and came up with a strategy called Timely Valued Medicines, or TVM. And I can say from the beginning that the success rate in phase 3 could be improved from about only 30% to up to 75% in a few years. And also the development timeline that was above industry average, we actually reduced by 2 years, which of course for patients and competitiveness and commercial reasons is a great achievement. So the question is, how did we do this? First of all, to demand better data for progression all along the R&D value chain, but in particular, before you start phase 3, you need robust phase 2 data in the right patient population. And here, that is an easy statement to say, but in some areas like Alzheimer's, it's very difficult to have phase 2 data in a smaller population. You actually need phase 3 data to show that your agent is actually working many times. But we started to also then have better patient selection using the imaging technology that we had acquired for amyloid beta. And also, if you think about the overall speeding up development, if you can have attractive phase 2 data, it's much easier to convince key opinion leaders to be part of your program, and also having sites that can recruit patients. So if you have robust phase 2 data, development will go easier and quicker. Furthermore, another key contributor to the slow development times was the phase 3 material was often delayed. We came up with a solution, which of course is also a risk, to make phase 3 material at risk for the phase 3 start ahead of all the phase 2 data. But it meant that you could move on much quicker, and also to have better proactive regulatory interactions so that we knew exactly what the regulators would demand, and also having payer input to what you need to do in phase 3 to have access and acceptance by payers to a new approved agent. And that, comes into valued medicines where for us, then the interaction with payers at an early stage was very important, and also understanding the patients, about tolerability, etc., and safety with the benefit risk, and meaning that patients stayed on the medicine. Finally, another area where Lilly had been relatively restrictive in the past was to look outside for external innovation, including in academia, but also then if early compounds were available for partnering from biotechs or other pharmas, we should really look at them in more depth and be open to accepting external innovation. And that had happened in Lilly earlier, but it was also a somewhat unexploited area. And you could see then, like I said, that Lilly had just acquired ImClone, and it acquired for oncology, Avid radiopharmaceuticals for the Alzheimer diagnostic space. And also there was an alliance being made by Boehringer Ingelheim for oral diabetes type 2 agents, which Novo didn't have, and it gave Lilly immediately a competitive edge. The SGL2 Georgians and also a DPP4 Trajanta. So these are some examples of learning from external innovation and also capturing opportunities by partnering.
I think there's a lot to unpack here, so I'm going to hand it over to Simon to unpack some of these insights.
Yeah. Thank you, Martin. So I was wondering, Jan, so in these early days, you made the diagnostic of the organization, and then as leaders, you came together and said to each other, we need some kind of R&D transformation here. Can you maybe speak a little bit to what was the conversation between you and the rest of the executive team there? How did you actually go about starting this, trying to sort of fix the R&D engine?
Well, if you look at a big pharma organization, it's a value chain discussion from the start of programs, right? For an unmet medical need in a strategic area, generating an agent for human testing, developing it, but also having it manufactured and then submitted to regulators and having it approved and getting it commercialized. So you have to be open with your colleagues then in various components of a big organization. And Lechleiter, his leadership facilitated very much the interactions between research and manufacturing and commercial. So I want to say that Lilly was unique compared to AstraZeneca in how well people listened and collaborated with each other.
Yeah, I think, and that's culture eats strategy for breakfast or whatever the saying is. So is there something, can you put a few words on how did the culture change? Is there something, because you talk about these hardcore parameters like cycle times, probability of success, but is there some unique characteristics around the culture that changed, or was it the culture at Eli Lilly always the same way?
Key thing for culture was, to empower teams more so that you had very skilled and experienced individuals in these key teams, particularly in development. And in the past, there were many different decision bodies that had to be convinced before you could progress. And the new culture was more to trust the teams and let them go ahead and generate clinical data. And then you could justify better, should we make a big investment or not. So again, the cycle times to get to the clinic and also being in the clinic are very important for patent life in particular and competitiveness. Trusting people for decision making was a big culture shift. I think also to look at competition in more detail. because Lilly was not very good in competitive intelligence when I came, and that was something that we put efforts behind on public material, and it was not buying, but it was using artificial intelligence collection, for instance, of competitive material that were published in abstracts or patents or clinical journals, proved to be very important when you planned your own trials. You can learn a lot from competition. And I think for Lilly, looking at Novo was very helpful to decide what to do and what not to do.
Yeah. No, I think that's very well said. And now thinking also how the decision-making processes started to change. Can you maybe, before we dive in on the specifics, how did the sort of meeting culture, so to speak, in the investment committees change? So say that teams were increasingly empowered, but also I would assume the investment committee started asking sort of tougher questions on what the minimum bar would be for a molecule to progress. So you hinted at strong phase 2 data, for instance, but what was did you have like a framework around what it requires for a molecule to advance to, say, phase 3?
To advance to phase 3 usually was an executive team decision, where there was a detailed presentation then of various components, like how good are the clinical data, what do we know about competition, even if it's not a head-to-head in phase 2. Have we compared competition in the preclinical space, made the competitor compounds, etc., and compared it at least in animal models, how it looks? And then, what about manufacturability? Is this an agent that we can produce with a reasonable cost of goods and also capability, so we don't run out of commercial material, which, of course, hints to the GLP situation in the beginning.
Yeah.
And then, is this an indication that fits with the strategic strength of Lilly, or do we need extra efforts with key opinion leader support, etc., for new areas? And for Lilly, that was immunology, which was a new emerging area. Yeah, that's a little bit the key aspects. But in the end, of course, it also means that the company needs resources from current products to fund the phase 3 program. And to do that, there should also be a reasonable or high chance of success and acceptance by regulators and also payers. So those two components, what do the regulators need and the likelihood of acceptance, and also do we have payer input already at this stage, which Lilly got? And I've been in many meetings with payers, which initially I think were kind of scary because they were demanding a lot of things that I had a very hard time to believe that would ever be achieved by this agent. But then it turned out that some, data can be better than anticipated. And I think the Tirzepatide data, with Mounjaro and Zepbound actually became better than anticipated. And also the Jardiance data for CV outcomes for heart failure was not expected. So maybe that part of luck, or you could say gut feeling, to move on and get the data, and then the data will speak for themselves.
Yeah. And I was wondering, because you mentioned that in the past, Lilly had advanced molecules into phase 3 that turned out to have low probability of success, and ultimately they failed. So now after this transformation on R&D productivity, did you have a much more heavy-handed investment committees that stopped many more projects? Or how was it, like a cultural shift not to advance these where you cross your fingers and hope for the best? Or what sort of changed in prioritization? Yeah.
The bar went up for starting phase 3. So yes, there were some programs that never came into phase 3, even if they had some phase 2 data, but they were considered too risky to invest hundreds of millions of dollars, or that these will never be as good as competition. And another component of phase 3, particularly in the novel competitive space, was to do head-to-head trials with the leading agents. And of course, that's a risk, but you need to do that to satisfy payers.
But I think, and that maybe you can add a few more words to that head-to-head, because you say you need to do it, but I think many companies would simply be too afraid to do a head-to-head study. But Lilly has always had some guts in that area. So can you speak to that?
Remember, head-to-head experiments can also be done in animal models, right? That's
sure.
May or may not translate to human patients. But I think it's a very natural thing if you work in the pharmaceutical industry to include head-to-head comparisons as a natural component of phase 3. Or sometimes, if you don't have enough resources, perhaps you can wait and do that after regulatory approval as a life cycle management. But in the end, if you are aiming to have a real success, a big product, a blockbuster, that's what you need to do. And it's really about beating standard of care. Of course, competition, you cannot do head-to-head if the agent is not approved already. So that's, may mean that you will do it later. But I believe the risk is worth taking. And I don't think Lilly has lost too many head-to-head comparisons so far.
No, I think, true. But of course, there's a risk if it comes out the other way around. And recently we had in the GLP-1 space where it didn't pan out so well for Novo Nordisk. But so maybe you can walk us through. So what tools would you be using as part of making decisions on the portfolio and the program level? You mentioned sort of your analysis that went into it and payer analysis and whatnot, but you also mentioned the gut feel. So did you have a set of standard metrics, or was it an executive discussion, or what actually went into those decisions and prioritizations on the pipeline?
Sometimes it's, the scientific discussions about programs in various disease areas can be very different, right? Whether it's a short indication like reducing pain, or if it's a very long-term thing like improving cardiovascular outcomes or heart failure. So one has to be realistic about how easy it is to compare different agents. So in the end, it's also about what is the strength of the company's skills, and do we have the capabilities to make a success of this? And it's also easier for companies to generate new products in their areas of commercial strength, like for Lilly then diabetes, and also in the neuroscience space. And I guess Novo is really getting a lot of support for the diabetes area and the metabolism. It's harder to jump onto a new bandwagon, and that's why I felt that Lilly Oncology was worthwhile doing, because Lilly had a few products in that space already, whilst in the immunology space, it was brand new. But here one could look at competitions like the Novartis IL-17 and make a better agent, and etc. So of course, it's a lot of details for these judgments, but in the end, it's really a high-level decision for the executives. We are accountable for the success of this agent, and we spend hundreds of millions of dollars of shareholder money on it. And if it fails, it's on us, right? If we succeed, we, of course, expect to be rewarded.
Yeah. So it basically comes down to an executive conversation and the judgment on the particular ones. It's not like there's a standard set of numbers or NPV or whatever we have. Is that?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the NPV, the net product value, or whatever the acronym means. But, There has been consultancy firms investigating with big pharmas. How good were your predictions of NPV at the time of launch of a product and compare it to 5 years later? And the conclusion was that it's very difficult to predict the NPV because at the time of launch, you don't really know how good the competition may be. And also there may be new indications and line extensions that you haven't really thought of. So it's better to look at is the data really good? Is the unmet medical need there? And is it a large or small patient population? That's, more at the high level instead of using specific numbers and differentiate on that.
Yeah. And I was wondering, because Lilly also has a strong reputation for using decision science and having these decision analysts to support the senior leaders. Is that something you also happened when you were there?
I heard of it, but like I said, I think decision making is very much up to understanding the science of what's going on in this program and listen to the experts, what's their views, instead of believing that some artificial system can help you and tell you what to do. Like I said, it's up to your judgment to move this forward or not. And you have to walk the talk in a company and meet enough programs, hear their presentations, discuss with the key experts, talk to external key opinion leaders, and get really a broad understanding of the whole area and then the specific details of this program, including then what do you know about competition and the current standard of care. So, maybe, in the future there could come something better. But as far as I remember, the decision making was not based on a specific computer system.
No. And now you already give the impression, Jan, that your decision-making style is very sort of holistic one. So of course you mentioned design, but you also mentioned payers, competition. So how early would your thoughts start to sort of revolve around commercial situation in the marketplace? Was that sort of post proof of concept, or was that something you brought in very early in research?
Yes, you need to understand the disease, right? But also what is the current standard of care and what's the situation for the patient? What do you need to improve? I mean, is it that the patient cannot tolerate the drug? And of course, for GLP-1, that was obvious with the nausea and gastrointestinal effects. So you need a slow titration, which, commercially is not very common, right? Simplicity for commercial, 1 pill, 1 dose, and that's it. But if you need to slowly titrate, you can actually help adherence for the patient and tolerability. And also, if you have a pill instead of injection, that's probably easier for many patients. So to understand the patient is something that Lilly researchers were very keen on. And that discussion was not only owned by commercial, it was owned all along the value chain, which also meant that devices, for instance, for injectables were very important in the GLP-1 space.
And I was wondering, I mean, it almost seems like at Lilly that part of the edge that company has is its ability to do this cross-functional collaboration, even if it sounds a little bit cliche, but it seems like that collaboration across functions is really smooth.
Yes, well, like I said, the Leitleiter at the top was very keen on people at Lilly, was almost like a family, and having a family, I know that sometimes there are heavy discussions in the family and people don't agree on things, but in the end, there is an overall need, to keep the peace within the family so that you can happily live moving forward. And Leiter was very good in setting that standard for executives. So I think it's very much up to human behavior. And coming back to my hockey experience, that if you are a team, you can achieve much more than you can as individual players, even if they are superstars, right? So you really need people that support these superstars and also allow them some freedom so they can flourish. And I've seen over the years that certain individuals that are extremely skilled can be difficult to manage by their managers, but they have to be given freedom to really feel that they can do their best. And it's also interesting that if you have the right engagement in a team, you can do a miracle like the US hockey team in 1980, Lake Placid, when the college students beat the Russian professionals. Yeah, it's really about, and Lilly, when I was there, had a very motivated team of people. And yeah, they really wanted to win over other companies like Novo.
Yeah, no, you can definitely sense the team spirit there. And I wanted, before I hand it back to Martin, so you gave this impression that basically decision making is almost common sense. You collect all the inputs from various sources and experts, but still, and we cannot reduce it to a computer system. But what would be your sort of maybe top advice for decision makers out there in the industry today who are about to make, a decision under great uncertainty, as we do all the time in this industry? Is there something you can condense to practical advice?
Yeah, first of all, I think decision making in a big pharma is different than in a biotech with a single agent. And, if the company existence depends on moving a compound into the clinic, they will do it, right? Even if it's a low chance of success, maybe in the end. Big pharma usually have a portfolio of agents and therapeutic areas, so you can make choices among the best, and which give it, a better predictability, in my view. But in the end, it's about skillful people that have the ability to judge what does it take to create a successful product in the current competitive environment and regulatory and payer environment compared to standard of care. And you need that knowledge inside the big pharmas, and give those people accountability and freedom to decide.
No, well said. So I'll hand it over to you, Martin.
I think that was very nicely summarized. And I think what we could have heard during the discussion a couple of times was the topic of Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk. So I wonder, and that is, I think, also something that is on everyone's mind in the pharma right now. If you open the news, you see Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk, dynamic in the obesity market and metabolic diseases. Having spent years inside Eli Lilly, when you look at it from the outside today, what do you see?
Well, I see two very successful companies, I think. And I'm a little bit surprised that Novo has been beaten so much recently, since they have a lot of skills and also good products, in my view. And I should confess, that Lilly looked a lot at Novo in the GLP-1 strategy. So a key, let me say like this, that Lilly and Novo has actually been in the diabetes metabolism space for a century, right? 100 years, more or less. And Lilly was first with insulins with the University of Toronto collaboration, Banting and Best, in 1924. And then they gave up the patent, and Novo could enter, with porcine insulin and help people also with diabetes. So, and, in an area, it's very good to have two major competitors because it will drive progress. And if one of them fails, for patients, they always have the other than to rely on.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great competition. And I looked at the history a little bit, and Lilly often have been first and with insulin. They were also first with human insulin with a Genentech collaboration. And Lilly was actually first with GLP-1s with exenatide and Byetta with the amylin collaboration, approved in 2005. And then Novo came with liraglutide and semaglutide, and that, of course, shook up Lilly when semaglutide showed not only good glucose control, but also this major body weight loss. And that triggered, within Lilly effort to make an agent better than semaglutide. The first one was Trulicity, dulaglutide with a FC portion coupled to GLP-1 to have a once weekly, while exenatide Byetta was twice daily, which was not liked by patients. So the dilemma was that Trulicity was very good in controlling hemoglobin A1C, but it didn't cause a major body weight reduction like Ozempic, the semaglutide. So then I think it was a major breakthrough with the Tirzepatide, GLP-1 co-agonist, which with acylation also had an once weekly administration. And that was really the blockbuster that beat semaglutide, both a little bit better with hemoglobin A1C and also with body weight reduction. But having, some of the same tolerability issues, so it needed titration to really have the best from patients. And the other area that Lilly didn't do was to have an oral agent, oral peptide agent instead. I think it was smart collaboration with Chugai about the orforglipron, which is a more traditional, although relatively large size, small molecule synthetic chemical. And that has now shown recently to have a superior efficacy, both on hemoglobin A1C and on body weight reduction to the novel oral peptide agent Wegovy. So the race continues, but I think Lilly right now is on the top. And the key question is, what about the future? I think it's a major achievement that cardiovascular outcomes seems to be better with the GLP-1s. Unfortunately, I think Novo failed with the Alzheimer's disease progression trial. That would have been fantastic, but maybe, the brain penetration is not enough for these peptide agonists. Lilly had a success with sleep apnea, which again, a new expansion for GLP-1. And I think we will see several other indications emerging from this space. And of course, there are many other players that now are trying to enter the space. But Lilly and Novo has, I think, a major advantage of being among the first to enter this space and also having long-term safety data, which, always takes time before you can get. So if you are a patient, that are taking now Lilly and Novo or Novo agents, which have long-term safety data, would you switch that to a new competitor? I wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
And Jan, I'm wondering if you dare to speculate or at least put your opinion to it, what is it that made Eli Lilly stood out over Novo Nordisk, at least in this race?
Well, I think for me it's very hard to pinpoint what made Lilly so successful, except saying that both Lilly and Novo have extremely skillful scientists. They have great leadership people, and they have the tradition of being in this diabetes metabolism space, which is helpful for key opinion leader contacts and external collaborations and so on. But in the end, maybe it's also a little bit about luck and believing in certain scientists that, like the ones that made Mounjaro. Do you mean that you can make a co-agonist? And they've also made a tri-agonist now for GLP-1 and other incretin receptors. So perhaps the scientific freedom is within Lilly for scientists to test new things are the one that actually made the difference.
That's a very fair take. And I'm wondering, you mentioned multiple times during the conversation, the need to learn from experiences. And I wonder, using this race as an example between Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, do you see some lessons of learning stemming out of this competition in terms of how medicine actually succeed?
Well, you need a very well integrated R&D value chain. And I think it was a huge mistake by Novo, but partly also by Lilly, to not betting enough on manufacturing capabilities. And it's kind of intriguing that, Trump's demand of US first actually helped Lilly to create a stronger capability to deliver a Mounjaro, for instance. Which is a little bit ironic, I think. But learnings, again, you need an R&D value chain that is highly integrated, can talk to each other, and spend most of the time on moving projects and products forward instead of infighting.
And can I ask, so at Lilly, did you see Novo Nordisk as being more conservative R&D wise?
I don't think that specific word was used. I think Lilly looked at Novo as a very experienced competitor with a lot of respect. And I knew, the head of research, Mats Kroksgaard, quite well. We actually played tennis sometimes together. But we didn't talk about specific company secrets, of course. But I think as human beings, you need to be able to also interact with your competitor, which, I learned in my hockey days, that you can check them if they don't behave.
I think that's a very nice take, and also learning from your hockey experience and career. We are now coming towards the end. Is there anything we perhaps didn't discuss that you feel is important to add at this point?
Yeah, I'm coming back to my comment about the unique Lilly people that I met and had the privilege of working with and learning from and listening to. And I again want to mention John Lechleiter, the CEO and Lilly board chairman during most of my time at Lilly. He recruited me and he trusted the research when there were Alzheimer's failures. He was also very supportive for the GLP-1 activities. That was also true for the diabetes business unit head, Enrique Conterno, which really wanted to win over Novo, and he was really the architect of the commercial strategy for GLP-1 and also for Jardiance, etc. Then if you look at my LRL organization, Tom Bumol from the biotechnology space was a key person for all the peptides and monoclonal antibodies, but also for immunology. Jude Onya and especially Jordi Alsina in the peptide group, who was behind Mounjaro, of course, is someone that Lilly should have a great thanks to. David Muller, Rucciameno from Diabetes Research. And then we had a big development center of excellence, which was led by Ann White, but also Bill Heath, Jim Collins, General Sabo, Rob Metcalf from areas like manufacturing or upscaling, but also then clinical trial preparations and geographies and also regulatory interactions. But when I came to Lilly, I was very new and didn't really understand the company well, and particularly the use of acronyms, which, almost killed me. And they never explained the acronyms, and I learned, very early in school that if you use an acronym, the first time you are using it, you have to explain it. But that was never done at Lilly. So I want to thank Andy Dahlem, who was head of my operations team, and my personal assistant, Pam Edmonds, who knew Lilly people from the bottom to the top. So I would not have succeeded, and Lilly would not have been where it is today without the efforts of these people. So thank you.
That's very nice. And I think also the fact you are naming people, as it sounds like, from across the organization really shows to what you have been pointing to, that the team at Lilly across the value chain was really working closely together. There is a question we always ask our guests, and that is, what have you been reading lately? Do you have any good recommendations for our listeners for a good read? Whether it is scientific, non-scientific, fiction, non-fiction.
Well, I like to read scientific journals, particularly clinical trial data like New England Journal of Medicine and Lancet, and more basic science like Nature, Science, and Cell. So That's what I do for reading, and it gives, I think, my brain the best satisfaction. And I rather watch a movie than to read a book. I think that's more real.
That's fair. And in terms of if people want to reach out to you, is it through LinkedIn?
Yes. Well, I'm available at LinkedIn if people want to contact me for any questions. So just go ahead. I still have time in my retirement to engage in new activities, so I'm open for that.
Perfect. So thank you very much, Jan. It has been a pleasure talking to you.
Well,
Thank you very much,
for
Jan.
having me. Yeah, thank you.
So this was yet another interesting discussion we had on this podcast with another interesting guest. What did you take away, Simon?
Well, Martin, I think this was very enjoyable, almost like a masterclass in R&D productivity transformation in big organizations. So I think, maybe start with the big picture. I think, Jan, he really described nicely how a transformation, like an R&D productivity transformation, starts from the very top. I think he mentioned several times how it was sort of radiated from the CEO to the executive team and to everyone at Eli Lilly. And that's probably the most important starting point for a transformation like this. It needs to come from the top to show that there is commitment to change the company, and you have to be aligned at the top. And that leads me maybe to the next point to mention is about the culture. I think, of course, we can discuss the analytics around, cycle times, probability of success, but it's actually very much about culture. And I think Jan painted a very nice picture of how culture was the driving force behind it. And I would maybe mention specifically around the cross-functional collaboration, because that's probably the glue you need to sort of operate R&D at this massive scale that you would have at Eli Lilly and other places. So if you cannot sort of have this seamless cross-functional collaboration brought about by a healthy culture, which is again emanates from the top of the company, then it's probably doomed to fail, whatever transformation, whether it's AI transformation or R&D transformation. So I think that's probably, in a nutshell, what I took away. Well, what about you?
What you just described, it fully resonates, and I fully agree, right? I think we've talked a lot about the need for more cross-functional collaboration across the value chain in the previous episodes. And I think when Jan was talking, he very clearly kept mentioning how they work together across the entire value chain. You could hear it also at the end when he was thanking people from different parts of the organization for like 2 minutes. And I think in everything he described, it was a lot of people coming together to do one joint mission, which was to bring valuable medicines to patients. There was this mission, and it took everyone to do it well. I think that was really clear from what he was describing. And hearing it from someone who was there really at a time where, Eli Lilly was whispered multiple times to be a potential takeover target. So from someone who was there really from the moment when they were trying to rebuild the company to the point where it was today, and still focusing majority of the discussion around collaboration, I think that's a really strong use case.
Yeah, no, definitely. And maybe also around decision-making and decision-making style. So I think Jan also, even if it's maybe sounds easy to do decisions like he explained, I think he demonstrated a very holistic way of making decisions. So I think he carefully outlined how he, integrates all these facets of a decision. Of course, the science, the clinical program, competition, the commercial case, to really bring it to something that is valuable. So he was not just, the science nerd only with curiosity around the science, but this, even if he is, a super scientist for sure, but he has this very holistic view on how to make decisions within an organization.
I fully agree. And I have to say my heart hurt a little bit for a moment when you asked him about NPV and he said that net product value or whatever that is, I haven't really used it. I have to say I was offended for a bit. But I think when he went on describing on how they did decision making, even though he wasn't maybe using NPV, I think what he described to a big extent was really rational thinking in terms of what has to be true for this medicine to be valuable at the market. So kind of like almost all the components that have to be true in a business case that makes sense. And then maybe then he didn't look at the final NPV, but I feel like with that mindset, you will ultimately end up making choices that will very likely lead you to a valuable business case. That would just be how I heard it from him, right? I think if you go through that thought process, I would have a hard time seeing how you would not end up with a valuable business case at the end. So then maybe he didn't need it.
No, I completely agree. And I think this pattern of decision making is something we have seen multiple times among very senior decision makers, that of course they have probably all the analytics in the world to support and all the slides and charts and whatnot. But at the end of the day, they need to step back and take this holistic approach and use their judgment. Because ultimately, these senior leaders, they are accountable for the decisions. That's also why they are paid the way they are. So I think that's probably a common theme we have seen. Of course, you can say, okay, then it becomes a little bit gut feeling. But again, gut feeling is also pattern recognition and decades of experience crystallizing. So yeah, I think that was a nice exercise around decision-making processes.
I think if it comes from Eli Lilly, they have a track record of making good decisions. I think whatever they did, it seems to work. And as we discussed during our quest to find R&D productivity, it's not like we found it in too many places in this podcast so far, but we seem to find it in Eli Lilly.
Yeah. And I think, and that's of course the reason we previously did an episode with Aaron Schad, who was also at Eli Lilly. Yes, I think next, Martin, we have to look in our own backyard here in the Copenhagen area to see if we can find a voice from Novo Nordisk who can give the inside story from Novo Nordisk, because I think it's such a wonderful textbook example of two companies, culture, R&D productivity. You have the whole buffet of topics. So I think that's on our shoulders to do that. Yes. But with that, I think we should conclude here. Make sure to like and subscribe, and what else have you? Find us on LinkedIn. Just search for Cures and Capital Podcast, and do not hesitate to send a message to either Martin or myself. You will find us on LinkedIn. We are very happy to take suggestions for future guests. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening. Bye. See you next time.